if I ever get to go to the moon, I would like to create a sort of lunar Zen garden. I hope that everybody will be going to space.
Hi, I'm Lukasz and this is Space Talks, the place when you can get inspired by a space sector. In this episode, I will give you more information about art in space and designing a garden on the other planets. We'll talk about future careers in space, like a space doctor or space lawyer. My guest will be Professor Chris Welch from the International Space University and also a new president of the British Interplanetary Society. Chris considers himself as a Spaceist, and let's see what exactly he means by that. Chris, you describe yourself very often as a Spaceist. Can you explain our viewers this term?
Yes, Spaceist was a term that I made up because in my career I started off as a physicist. Then I became more of an engineer, and now I'm at the International Space University, which is an interdisciplinary institution. I'm interested in lots of different aspects of space. So, for instance, space art, but policy, law, economics, science, human spaceflight. And so I thought the best term was Spaceist. I'm a person who is engaged with space in lots of different ways.
That sounds fair. And you are also recognized as an author of the first ever paper on the design of the extraterrestrial gardens. I would like to deepen this topic a little bit. What kind of gardens will we meet in the future, outside or inside our space colonies? Will their function be radically different than the Earth ones?
Well, first of all, being the first author, I can't absolutely claim that I know I'm the first author. When I went looking for papers about extraterrestrial garden design, I didn't find any, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any, but certainly I wrote one some years ago. And for me, I was coming at the idea of gardens from what do human beings like in gardens. Now, I come from Great Britain, and I guess there the default idea of a garden is it's a space behind someone's house. It has a grass lawn, and then maybe on each side there are flower beds, typically with roses and other plants with coloured heads growing in them, and that's a very British idea of a garden. But I had been talking to a friend of mine who was from Greece, and he had travelled to Ireland. And when I said to him, "What did you make of Ireland?" he said, "It's all very green. It's unnatural. It's for me coming from an arid climate." And that got me thinking about how what we think of as a normal garden is very culturally dependent. And then being a space person and a science fiction reader, I thought, well, what would somebody who had been born on the moon or in a space colony or on another planet think of as a garden? And about the same time, for reasons I won't go into, I was associating with quite a few garden designers, professional people who design gardens. And they said, well, a garden can be anything that you want it to be. It doesn't even have to have plants in it. You can have sculptural gardens. And this got me thinking about, gardens. And being, a scientist by background, I tried to come up with some sort of system for describing gardens. So I had gardens which were, either very natural at one end or very heavily human mediated at the other. And the essence, I think, of change is important in most gardens. And that then got me thinking about, what would this mean on another planet? So, for instance, if somebody, hypothetically had been born on the moon, and their idea of a normal outside landscape was the grey surface of the moon, would they find a small container with green plants in? Would they consider that to be natural? And so I have this idea, if I ever get to go to the moon, I would like to create a sort of lunar Zen garden by, arranging moon rocks and scraping the regolith into particular shapes like the Chinese do. But if, say, you were on the surface of Mars, Okay, there on Mars it's different again. It's very dry, but you do get water ice. You get wind. You could maybe come up with some sort of wind powered pump that would move under certain conditions. Melted water. I mean, that's not possible at the moment, but in the future. So it was these sort of ideas, trying to think what it would be like to be a human being living in a different environment, and what you would find pleasant and relaxing, maybe. So that was what I was thinking. So they don't even have to have plants in them. I mean, they might do, but it'll depend entirely on the human beings, living in these different places.
And speaking of this space garden design, do you think that there will be any impact of the space garden design on similar projects here on Earth?
Well, there are. I mean, in two ways, I guess. There is on Earth something called land art, which basically features modifying the landscape. A famous one is in Arizona called Rodin Crater, where this very large crater has been sculpted almost to give particular views of the sky. And I could see that there could be a kind of, if you like, a conceptual discussion between that sort of activity and things you might do on the moon. But at the same time, if one was actually to try and grow plants in space, there's a relationship between the technologies there. I mean, even now when they grow plants in space, they use particular LED lights to give particular frequencies to improve the efficiency of the plants growing. And of course, you can use that technology on Earth as well. So there'll also be potentially the technology spin out, spin in, as well as, if you like, I don't think I've heard this term used before, but artistic spin out and spin in.
Well, speaking of art, in many interviews you also focus on the aspects of a need for art in space. So as the human presence, I hope, in space will grow, do you expect that the new type of art to develop?
Well, we're already seeing space art. In fact, there's much more space art being executed, I think, than many people realize, in various forms. I mean, back in the 1990s, the American artist Arthur Woods had his Cosmic Dancer sculpture go to the Mir space station. He also organized the first art show on the Mir space station. A whole set of pictures were flown up there, and the cosmonauts arranged them. And then since then, there have been people who've been doing various projects. I mean, working with a Mexican artist, Noam, we at ISU, we have an artistic payload on the International Space Station at the moment. But I think there is still this issue that the space community, if you like, the space community mindset is still a little bit that the purpose of going to space is for exploration and for science and maybe for national security. And other aspects, not sure about that. Whereas if we really are going to have a lot of people living in space in the future and doing things in space, it's going to become more democratic, and more people are going to want to do things. If I say I want to go to Florida to do art, people might go, well, fine, okay, if you want to go to Florida to do art. But if I say I want to go to space to do art, it's kind of, really, is that allowable? And I think if we are going to have humans in space, if we are going to democratize, space, then artists and other people will be able to do things in space just because they want to, because they find it interesting in the same way that they do all over the surface of the Earth. So for me, it's just a natural development. I happen to be particularly interested in it, I suppose, because it's interdisciplinary in nature, and it's a bit of a counterbalance to the kind of predominant kind of scientific, technical mindset that space has. But I hope that everybody will be going to space.
Well, that's good news for me, because I'm historian, so actually I hope that it won't be only scientists or engineers participating in human exploration of space, but also humanists and artists.
Absolutely.
I think it can happen, actually, that we see humanists and artists in space.
Well, I think it will. I think it will take a little while before many can go. I mean, artists have been sending payloads to space for several decades already, I mean, on the day that we are recording it, this interview, this is the first day that Blue Origin is selling tickets for suborbital space flights. So I suppose it's possible that as we are talking, a rich artist, who's got a couple of $100,000, I'm guessing, is booking a ticket on a Blue Origin flight, and in the couple of minutes that they will be traveling up into space and in free fall, will do something artistic then. So, that will count as an artist as having been to space, if only for a short period. By some definitions, there have been artists in space already, because, for example, the American astronaut Nicole Stott, she painted watercolors. That's a long tradition. Again, the Russians were I think it was Alexei Leonov was the first person to sketch in space, and cosmonauts and astronauts have done pictures. Thomas Pesquet, the European astronaut who's there at the moment, on his first mission to the International Space Station, he did for 4 artists on the ground 2 artistic projects. One was for Eduardo Kac, and was a sort of a model made out of paper that had been designed on the Earth, and then he created that in space. And then there was a deployment of a small prototype for what might one day be a sculpture on the moon. So there is this sort of thing going on. And then just at the moment, we have the Dear Moon project, which is selecting 8 people in principle to fly around the moon on one of Elon Musk's starships. And when that was first announced, that was exclusively about artistic and creative people. Later on, the scope was opened up a bit. So maybe by June, we will know that 8 artists have been selected to fly around the moon, sometime in the next decade. And this sort of thing will start to become more normal.
Recently, you've been elected as a president of the British Interplanetary Society. It's the world's long-established organization devoted to space. Can you bring more light to your goals and its name? Because I'm curious about this interplanetary part. Are you expecting to have members on other planets?
Well, I mean, obviously, it would be wonderful to have a Martian member. I think that may be a while. I mean, we actually have members in different countries. It's not just in Britain. For example, we have a very active Italian branch of the British Interplanetary Society. The British Interplanetary Society was founded in the 1930s. In the early 1930s, around the world, in Europe and America, there were quite a few space societies founded. So in Germany, it was the Verein für Raumschifffahrt that later developed its members, such as Wernher von Braun, later developed the German war rockets. In the US, there was the American Interplanetary Society that later renamed itself the American Rocketry Society. And I guess as part of this general movement, the British Interplanetary Society was set up by a man called Phil Cleater, who also wrote, one of the first books called Rockets Through Space. And actually, purely by chance, I have a copy of Rockets Through Space, which I bought, which just arrived today. I decided I should have a copy of it. So this was published in 1936. It was one of the first British books about travel into space. It was called Interplanetary because they were focused on interplanetary travel. Now, in the US, the American Interplanetary Society started building rockets and renamed itself the American Rocketry Society. But in the UK, the law, going back to the 1880s, actually prevented that because the propellants were classed effectively as explosives, and it was illegal to have them. So the British Interplanetary Society kept its name. And has continued ever since. From time to time, people suggest changing the name, but it never happens. And it's a little bit of a sort of antique historical name now. We'll be celebrating our 90th anniversary in just 2 years or so. And so the British Interplanetary Society, it exists to promote space and space travel and space activities. but it's always had this role of being slightly out there on the edge, looking at some of the concepts that maybe aren't, most people wouldn't consider to be, normal, sensible concepts at the moment. For example, interstellar travel. There are now a number of organizations in the world that are looking at interstellar travel, the Initiative for Interstellar Studies, Icarus International, the Interstellar Research Group, and so on, spread around the world. But the British Interplanetary Society, has been doing this for decades. When I was an undergraduate student, longer ago than I care to remember, 40 years ago, the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society would arrive in my post box once a month, and in those days they were color coded, and the ones with the red band across the top, those were the interstellar ones, and you would find all sorts of admittedly very speculative concepts. We're running a 2-week course on interstellar world ships with the students, because again, if you can't study interstellar travel at the International Space University, where can you study it? I mean, and so the BIS motto is from imagination to reality. So it's about imagining things, and then trying to find routes, trying to find ways, mechanisms to turn them into reality. And it started off in the 1930s, considered to be a bunch of crazy people. And of course, once Sputnik was launched, once Yuri Gagarin, went into space, and we landed on the moon, it became apparent that they were completely right, all along. So let's hope they're right about interstellar travel too.
Yeah. Now it's becoming more and more real, actually, when you hear and watch actually what's going on in the space sector in the next couple of years. So let me ask you about this. Let's talk about travel, this interplanetary travel. Let's focus on the solar system expanse first of the humanity. Do you think that we will have opportunity to build solid human bases on Moon and Mars during our lifetime?
I hope so, though it might turn out to be during your lifetime rather than during mine, because I think I'm a bit older than you. I think we're going to see the first steps.
BIC when I was born.
So, I mean, if we look at what Elon Musk is doing with Starship at the moment, and we know that NASA has just awarded the contract to SpaceX for their human landing system. I mean, assuming that all goes forward in the next 5 years or so, then Starship is so big that it enables you to deliver hundreds of tons of material and people to the moon each year, and that really is transformational, because if you're looking at like Apollo-like systems, you can deliver very little to the moon, and so you can't do much. But imagine if you can deliver a bulldozer to the moon, or nowadays a more high-tech equivalent that can drive around robotically, collect a regolith, and then use the sun's rays to solidify this, to make the start of a human habitation. Then suddenly things become much easier. Things that we couldn't do before, we can start to do. And so, yes, I do think that will happen. I mean, there I was looking at this sort of the Americans and the Europeans, but I mean, the Russians and Chinese have recently signed an agreement to cooperate on a lunar base.
I hope that we will see first generally international cooperation, because another Cold War in space, it's not very welcome here. You mentioned.
No, I agree with you completely.
Yeah, you mentioned.
It would be much better if everybody cooperated, but sometimes politics gets in the way.
Yeah, and sometimes it's too much, I can see. So you mentioned about ISU, and let's talk about international cooperation. You are the professor of the space engineering at the International Space University. So who can study at this unique university, and how it helps boost one's career in the space sector?
Okay, well, I mean, yes, ISU, the International Space University, was set up 30 years ago, or a little bit over 30 years. And the vision there was over time to build a network of people who are passionate about space, engaged in space from around the world. We specialize in what we call the 3 I's. Our programs are interdisciplinary, international, and intercultural. And so what we're trying to do over time is to build this big network of people who want to, if you like, change the world in space. And I think arguably we've been pretty successful, at doing that. We're an unusual university. Sometimes people think that ISU must be a bit like, I don't know, the Kennedy Launch Center. We have this enormous area, we have gleaming tall buildings. It's not quite like that, unfortunately. We are a relatively small organization at our central headquarters in Strasbourg, but we are very well connected into the space endeavor all around the world. We have an excellent network. We know people in all the space agencies and space companies, which helps us a lot. If you want to do the master's program, then you have to have an undergraduate degree. That's the basic requirement. Doesn't have to be in a technical subject at all. Obviously, we get quite a few engineers come on the program, but we get architects, we get economists, we get political scientists, we get people who are entrepreneurs, and that's the good thing. It's about having that mix of people from a whole set of different backgrounds who are looking to do different things in space. And really the ISU programs exist to give people the big picture so that they can see how everything links together, so that the lawyers and the engineers can talk to each other and have some common ground. The lawyers understand why you stationary orbit that goes over the poles, and the engineers understand why you have to talk to the International Telecommunications Union if you want to have a geostationary satellite, for example. And both of them understand some of the historical context of space and how that, how looking back at that, you can also look forward and see how that might affect future space policy and what you can do, legally in space in the future. So it's very much about seeing the big picture, about seeing all the connections between all the different aspects.
So I want to go back a little more in time, if you allow me, and ask you what prompted you to get involved in the space sector in the first place, and what drives you till today to do so.
I think what probably got me interested in space in the first place was the Apollo landings on the moon. I was 9 years old when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and I remember being entranced by the idea that there were 2 human beings up on the moon, walking around, and doing things. After that, I read an awful lot of science fiction. I was one of those kind of classic kind of space geeks who read all these stories by Arthur C. Clarke and others about doing things in space. The future of the human race lies, in getting off the planet. That doesn't mean we shouldn't take a great deal of care of the planet as it is. And I think you'll find most space people are actually pretty environmentally aware. But I do believe for longer term survival, and this is one area where I do agree with Elon Musk, we need to become a transplanetary species. We need to move off the planet. We need to be living on the moon, on Mars, in space stations, and anywhere else we can find that we can live, rather than just being on one planet. And of course, that opens up all the resources of the solar system to us as well. So I think there is scope for this expansion of humanity into space. I certainly hope that will happen, even if I'm not around to see it.
So I would like to ask you about giving an advice to people passionate about space and still looking for the path to get involved in the sector.
First thing to do is to join the British Interplanetary Society. I have to say that,
Okay.
As the president-elect, join the British Interplanetary Society, and that will immediately give you access to a whole set of space information. But if you're looking to make your career, it depends a little bit on how old you are. There's a very good organization called the Space Generation Advisory Council, the SGAC, for people between 18 and 35. And that's an excellent international network. If you can do an ISU program, that's very good as well. That will help you build your network and your expertise. We have the master's program, but we have a couple of summer schools, and we have some shorter programs, and we, now obviously have some things that we deliver, online as well. Or if you know in advance which area of space you want to go into, then try and get on a program that, that supports, that interest. So if you want to be a space engineer, do a space engineering, program. If you want to be a space lawyer, there are space lawyer programs. If you want to be a space doctor, there are space doctor programs. If you want to be an astronaut, well, that can be more difficult. Just at the moment, the European Space Agency is looking for astronauts. So just at the moment, you can apply to be an astronaut. But once that finishes, that may be more difficult. Or, of course, you can go down the kind of other route, what you might think of as the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk route, which is you do something else and become incredibly rich, and then you spend your money on space. I mean, Jeff Bezos, for example, was very interested in space when he was young. I mean, there's an organization called SEDS, Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, and he was heavily involved in that when he was an undergraduate student. But then he went off and became very rich, and then that allowed him to develop Blue Origin. Similar sort of thing with Elon Musk, who, first of all made his money through PayPal, initially, and then has used that wealth as a basis for building SpaceX. So that's the other way to do it. Don't do space to start off with, just become incredibly rich. Easy.
So Chris, thank you very much for the lovely talk. I think that it was an absolutely amazing journey through time, space, and art, and passion at the end. That's it for this episode. And if you wanna join Chris, follow him, you can find all the links in the comments and information to this episode. Thank you very much.
And thank you for inviting me. It's been great fun.